There's a new meta-analysis out comparing hormone therapy to phytoestrogens, specifically for the psychological symptoms of menopause. But anxiety, depression, mood, and the results are not what the just eat more soy crowd wants to hear. That's coming up, along with something I genuinely didn't expect to find in the research this week. What's actually happening to active duty military women going through perimenopause? On the job, in uniform.
Hi there, I'm Tony Lee, and this is Hot Flasher, your daily menopause podcast that serves up fresh news, research, and wellness tips. I've built a daily news pipeline to find the latest on women's health and menopause research. Allow me to introduce my co-host, Nykki, who handles the headlines. Take it away, Nykki.
Thanks, Tony. We've got a good one today. 3 studies landed this week that all, in different ways, are asking the same underlying question. What actually helps with the mental and emotional weight of menopause? Sleep disruption, anxiety, mood changes, the general sense that your brain has been replaced with something slightly less reliable. The research is starting to get more specific about what moves the needle, and a couple of these findings are worth sitting with, starting with the one that surprised me most in terms of its rigor, a randomized controlled trial published in PubMed this month by Solmaz, and colleagues looked at what happens when menopausal women go through an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program, MBSR. The outcome measures were quality of life, life satisfaction, sleep quality, and mental well-being. And the short version is, it worked. Across all 4 measures, the MBSR group improved compared to the control group. Now, I want to be precise here, because mindfulness helps has become such an ambient cultural noise at this point that it's easy to dismiss. This isn't someone's wellness app claiming it'll balance your cortisol. This is a structured 8-week program. The same MBSR framework developed by John Kabat-Zinn at UMass in the late 70s, which has decades of clinical research behind it for stress, pain, and anxiety. And this trial was randomized and controlled, which immediately puts it in a different category than a lot of the mindfulness research floating around out there. The sleep quality finding is the one I'd flag for listeners specifically. Sleep in menopause is notoriously hard to treat. It's often not a single cause problem. Hot flashes wake you up. Anxiety keeps you awake. Mood changes shift your sleep architecture. And then the sleep deprivation itself makes the anxiety and mood worse. It's a genuinely tangled system. What's worth noting about MBSR is that it's not targeting any one of those threads. It's working on the stress response system more broadly, and the sleep improvements may be downstream of that. That said, and I want to be clear about this, an 8-week mindfulness program improving sleep and well-being doesn't mean mindfulness is a substitute for hormone therapy, or for treating underlying sleep disorders, or for any of the other interventions that have stronger evidence for specific symptoms. What it likely is a meaningful complement, something you can do alongside other treatment. The kind of thing a well-resourced menopause care plan might actually include. The fact that we have a decent RCT behind it now matters, because it moves this out of the soft category and into something a clinician could point to. I'd also want to know more about the sample, size, demographics, whether participants had any prior mindfulness experience, what control looks like in this design. Those details affect how generalizable the findings are, but directionally, this is solid enough that if you've been on the fence about whether a structured mindfulness practice is worth the time investment, the evidence is getting more favorable. Something completely different landed this week in the NAMS journal. The journal Menopause published a study on perimenopause and menopause among active duty military service women. The abstract wasn't available, so I'm working from what the title and journal context tells us. But this topic alone is worth talking about. Active duty military women are one of the most underrepresented populations in menopause research. which, if you think about it, is remarkable. You have women who are doing physically demanding jobs, often in high-stress operational environments, with strict fitness standards in institutions that are not historically great at talking about reproductive health, and perimenopause hits. What happens? The practical problems are easy to imagine even without the full abstract. If hot flashes and sleep disruption are already disruptive to a desk job, what do they mean for someone whose job requires sustained physical performance and alertness? What does brain fog mean when you're making decisions that have real stakes? And beyond the functional stuff, what does it mean to be experiencing perimenopause in an institutional culture where any sign of physical limitation can affect your career trajectory? There's also the access piece. Military healthcare is in some ways very comprehensive and in other ways deeply specialised around combat injuries and acute care. Menopause specialist care is not typically a strength. The average GP already gets shockingly little menopause training. We're talking roughly 1 hour in medical school based on survey data, and military healthcare providers aren't immune to that gap. I'd genuinely like to see the full paper on this one. The military context is a useful lens precisely because it makes visible the structural problems that affect all working women in menopause, just amplified and made undeniable. When your workplace demands a certain physical and cognitive performance baseline and your healthcare system isn't equipped to support you through something that affects both, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. Women in less demanding jobs can sometimes manage around the gaps. Active duty service women often can't. If anyone has access to the full NAMS paper and wants to send it over, I'm genuinely curious about the methodology and findings. Rounding out this week, and this is the one I teased at the top, a 2026 systematic review and meta-analysis from Show and colleagues looked at the efficacy of hormone therapy versus phytoestrogens, specifically for the psychological symptoms of menopause. Anxiety, depression, mood disturbance, not hot flashes, not bone density, the psychological dimension, which tends to get less attention in the big HRT conversations. The findings: hormone therapy outperformed phytoestrogens. And not by a little. Phytoestrogens, which include things like soy, isoflavones, red clover, flaxseed, showed weaker and more inconsistent effects across the trials included in the analysis. The kind of inconsistency that makes it hard to say with any confidence that a phytoestrogen-based approach is a reliable strategy for managing menopause-related anxiety or depression. This matters because phytoestrogens have occupied this interesting cultural space as the natural alternative to hormone therapy, especially in the post-WHI years when a lot of women were scared away from HRT. And the soy isoflavone supplement market in particular has leaned hard into the menopause angle. The evidence for hot flash reduction from phytoestrogens has always been mixed. Some studies show modest effects, many show nothing significant. But there's been this persistent idea that even if the vasomotor benefits are uncertain, surely the phytoestrogens are doing something good for mood and mental health. This meta-analysis is a systematic attempt to answer that. And the answer is, not reliably, not compared to hormone therapy. Now, a few caveats that any careful reading of a meta-analysis requires. The quality of the individual trials matters enormously, and systematic reviews are only as good as the studies they're pooling. Trial sequential analysis, which this paper includes, is a statistical method that helps assess whether the accumulated evidence is sufficient to draw conclusions. And its inclusion here suggests that authors were being reasonably rigorous about that. But I'd want to look at what studies made it into the pool, how psychological symptoms were measured across those trials, and whether there's meaningful heterogeneity that the meta-level numbers are smoothing over. What I'm confident saying is this: If psychological symptoms, anxiety, low mood, depression are your primary concern, I'll just increase my soy intake and see what happens is not a strategy with strong evidence behind it. It might be something you do for other reasons. It might be part of a broader dietary pattern that benefits you in other ways. But as a targeted intervention for mood and anxiety in menopause, the evidence isn't there. Hormone therapy, for women who are candidates for it, has a substantially stronger evidence base for this. And that's a conversation worth having with a clinician who actually knows the menopause literature. Ideally, using tools like open evidence to look at what the current evidence actually shows, rather than us relying on a 5-minute appointment and a printout from 2004. The phytoestrogen market isn't going to tell you any of this. That's worth knowing.
Thanks for listening to Hot Flasher. We're back tomorrow with more, so don't forget to subscribe. See you tomorrow.